HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Age of Deer, Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors by Erika Howsare. Read by Erika Howsare. To my dearest, John, Elsie, Rosa. Landscapes are ephemeral compared to species. Anna Lowenhaupt Tsing et al. As all hunters know, the deer is the sweetest of game. Paul Shepard. Introduction. Summertime. The light was full and green. I sat in a camper in the woods, writing, facing a steep hillside, and here came twin fawns, one then the other. They couldn't see me, despite my easy view of them. They made their way down through beech and oak trees along a flank of the hill on a pathway I'd often seen deer use, that I myself have often used, walking with my daughters. The fawns were a few months old, still spotted along their sides, but past the newborn stage when their mother would have left them curled on the ground while she went off to find food. At this age, they'd be spending much of their time roaming along with her, learning how to move through her home range and what to eat. But where was the mother? The twins had arrived at the bottom of the hill, where there's a gate between stone pillars and a place to cross the quiet one-lane road. They loped across the pavement and into the tangle of weeds and boulders on the other side. I kept writing. Maybe 15 minutes passed. Then I looked up and she had materialized a little uphill of the gate. Not walking, just standing. She faced the way her fawns had gone, her head raised high. I watched her for a second or two, some fleeting mother-to-mother understanding in my mind. You're looking for them, aren't you? Before the fawns burst into view, galloping back across the road and straight toward where she stood. They were so much like human children as they ran, just like when I come home and my own girls rush right at me. It was that same unadulterated bond. There was no slowing down as they reached their mother. They crowded under her and jabbed their faces into her belly and began to nurse. I laughed out loud. I'd never seen deer nursing before. They were just like baby goats or calves, the lusty way they went at it, bumping their mother's hindquarters backward as they latched on. Being half-grown, they had to crouch to fit into the space under her body, their back legs folded and their forelegs outstretched. I could see the nearer one pawing the ground repeatedly with a front hoof. And again I was reminded of my own children, how they used to stroke my shirt with a hand as I nursed them. And I remembered that mix of sensations, patience and immense satisfaction, that now I imagined I could see in the stance of the doe, stoically waiting while her babies drank her down. A car approached. I could hear it coming over the rise. The three weren't in danger where they stood, but the doe would not want to keep nursing as the car went by. My mind flicked to the driver, wondering if that person would get to see what I was seeing, wondering if they'd be delighted too. The mother leapt as lightly as a dandelion seed. No disentanglement, no pulling or tugging. She just seemed to float up and over her fawns as she moved away up the hill, calm and self-contained. The white broom of her tail whisked the air once or twice. The fawns followed, the car passed, and the moment was done. I live in rural Virginia on a narrow road that noses against the austere forested wall of the Blue Ridge. My yard backs up to thousands of acres of woods. White-tailed deer are a constant in these introverted mountains, almost as elemental as the trees. Just in the last week, I've had 2 encounters with small groups of deer, found tracks in my garden, and discovered 2 of their bodies decomposing in the woods. Yet half an hour away, there are big suburban housing developments where residents spot deer just as often as I do. And in Charlottesville, the place we mean when we say we're going to town, deer also thrive, in the pockets between busy bypasses and leafy residential warrens and dry cleaners and bakeries. However strongly we might associate them with wilderness, there are deer who spend their whole lives in cities, and for the most part, they do fine. Species like dogs have a special relationship to humans that has evolved over millennia, one based on mutual benefit. Others, like big cats and whales, would be much better off without humans in the picture at all. But deer, in their quiet way, occupy a middle zone between those extremes of domestication and wildness. Far from tame, they are nonetheless experts at living with people, and in many ways they actually prefer to share habitat with us. All across North America, as in many other parts of the world, we exist in intimate proximity to deer. Like any family member, they stir naughty feelings. In my earliest memory of deer, my friend's father is dragging a carcass toward me. It's late fall in rural Pennsylvania, probably overcast, brown and gray. I'm standing in their yard, looking across a ravine to where he and another man, both wearing coveralls, have emerged from the woods with a deer they've shot. The power line cut where they're walking is a brushy no man's land, running up and over ridges in a straight line. Behind me is the road my friend and I both live on. Nearby is her house, chocolate brown, where we spend a lot of time playing dress-up and pretending to be detectives. Downhill are the ammonia-smelling pens where her father keeps his hunting dogs. He is a frightening, bad-tempered man. His words for us are always harsh. I remember him in this moment much more clearly than the deer. Like the sky on that day, his presence is oppressive, and I don't want to be there when he enters the yard. The memory ends when he's still far away. We must have skedaddled inside. My Uncle Jim hunted too. I was bookish and shy of these men, and unlike them, I had little connection to the woods. In Boy Scouts, my brother learned how to make a fire and pitch a tent, but in Girl Scouts, we wove sit-a-pons from wax paper and made Christmas ornaments out of different pasta shapes. I don't ever remember seeing a deer in our yard, and though it seems impossible, I have no memories of seeing living deer anywhere. They must have been there, but it was the dead ones that left an impression. We lived south of Pittsburgh, amid the small-town ruins of extractive industry. Pulling things out of the land, coal and natural gas, had a long legacy there. The Pittsburgh rivers, Monongahela, Allegheny, Ohio, are big and muscular, and the industries had been too. But during my childhood in the 1980s, the general feeling was one of embitterment and loss. Many steel mills had closed, jobs had disappeared, downtowns had hollowed out, leaving only lawyers' offices and hearing aid stores. Driving around, we saw gravel pits, junkyards, moldering industry, and raw-looking farms. People lived modestly and carefully because they had to. The folks who tended to talk about the loss of prosperity were the same ones who had gun racks in their basements. My parents weren't in this category. Both their fathers had hunted, but they didn't. Our house contained no trophy heads, but lots of LPs, books, and art. Culturally, if not geographically, my mother and father had moved some distance away from their roots. When I came of age, I took another big step to urban California and began to see Rust Belt ruins with more detachment. Looking at photos from this time, I see I was also drawn to the caricatures we make of living things, dolls in a junk shop window, decals of spring fawns and bunnies. I made ironic trophies of these places where our relationship to beings had been stretched beyond the realm of myth and snapped, becoming grotesque and candy sweet. After some time in California, where I met my now husband John, I returned to the East Coast and landed in Virginia, outside Charlottesville. This was not the Rust Belt. It felt gentler and cleaner. We lived in deep woods, learned to identify bird calls, and started a garden. I worked on a small farm for 3 summers, harvesting vegetables and observing as other workers dealt with live and slaughtered Berkshire hogs. We moved to a rented cottage on a large estate, and wandering its acres, found a spot where many deer bones had been dumped. I know we saw living deer, too, though again I don't specifically remember them, except one, a white doe that we spotted from the car one Halloween at dusk. We were becoming more attuned to the land. We bought a house at the foot of the Blue Ridge, kept chickens, and studied the trees. I also worked as a writer and was asked to produce a column on homesteading and green living, then a phrase much in circulation. My subject matter boiled down to dilemmas. There were the minutiae. Should we rip out invasive brush if it's sheltering songbirds? Is it better to buy hybrid seeds from the local hardware store or mail-order heirloom ones from Maine? And there was the big picture. What does stewardship mean? What was done to this place in the past, and how should that inform our actions? These questions spilled outside the boundaries of the column and into longer and longer essays and manuscripts of poetry. What is natural, and is natural behavior necessarily more ethical? Our ties to animals were the thorniest dilemmas of all. Human concepts framed their lives and deaths in deeply unsettling ways. The questions about them looked back at me with eyes of their own. Life among the ruins, the biology of artifice, these were still my habitat. All this time, deer had been lurking at the edges, as they do. In the background of our wedding photos was a deer skull we'd picked up at that dump site and hung on the wall of the farm cottage where we married. In our conversations with neighbors, there was talk about deer eating people's gardens. We saw them leaping fences or lying crumpled along the road on our long commute. Gunshots pierced the quiet in the fall. A neighbor brought us the tenderloin from a whitetail he'd shot on the edge of our land. The door handle on our old shed, installed by some former owner, was made of an antler. Now and then I'd hear about my brother getting a deer back in Pennsylvania. 6 years younger than me, he'd learned to hunt from Uncle Jim after I left for college. A lot of roads led to this book. I don't remember one moment when I decided to write it. It must have been an ordinary one, like spotting a deer on an evening run or dusting off the deer bones we'd found in the woods. My understanding of the human place on Earth, shaped by post-industrial rupture, scented by tomato plants, was profoundly uneasy. And deer were a single node where many of my questions about damage, repair, myth, nourishment, and the things that divide us might come together. Deer speak to our twin American obsessions with death and its denial. But being in Virginia had given me an awareness of deer as living beings, fellow inhabitants of the landscape who are not rare but familiar. They are animals whose impossible beauty plays against their commonness, their constant abundance. Deer sightings are most interesting to me when they're in some kind of half-human zone, a backyard, a roadside. I note their scat on trails or look up to find them watching me from among young trees and the rusting chassis of a pickup truck. I'm writing this in winter. These last few months have seen the annual fall rutting period for deer, which coincides with both hunting season and the highest incidence of deer vehicle collisions. In general, deer act a little crazy in the autumn before settling down to survival mode in winter, and their interactions with people reflect that cycle. Fall is a good time to observe the more contentious, fraught aspects of our modern relationship to them, the signs that, whether we think of it or not, we are living in an age of deer. In America, just during these last few months, people have debated the ethics of baiting deer with food or doe urine in order to shoot them, of hunting deer using dogs, and in a number of communities around the country, of culling programs that reduce urban deer herds. We've celebrated young children who have managed to kill big bucks, and punished an 18-year-old who filmed himself riding one in the backyard. We've encouraged hunters to kill coyotes, so that the coyotes won't kill as many deer, so that hunters will have more chances to kill deer. We like it when people with some perceived disadvantage, little girls, old women, wounded warriors, successfully bring down deer. But we also like it when deer become victims for people to save. From icy rivers, from storm drains, from fences and clotheslines in which they get tangled. One woman from Colorado posted a video of a mountain lion attacking a deer. Off camera, her distressed voice asks, "Oh, the poor thing, what should I do?" as though humans have some responsibility to stop predators from eating. On Vancouver Island, Canada, deer started turning up with BB gun injuries. Conservation officers suspected homeowners had been shooting them to protect their shrubs. Mule deer dangled from helicopters in Utah, where scientists studied their health. While officials reminded the public that feeding deer is a bad idea, stories nonetheless surfaced of people using food to lure deer onto their porches and even into their homes. The town of Pulaski, New York, announced that it would install a bronze statue commemorating Bella, a deer that had become the town's unofficial mascot. Raised by a farmer after her mother was killed by a car, Bella lived her adult life in town and was unusually comfortable with people. A local newspaper called her a special member of the Pulaski community. Several people were gored by deer. In Michigan, a hunter was killed by a deer he'd just shot. As in most years, vehicles in the U.S. killed well over 1 million deer, and hunters killed nearly 6 million. Chronic wasting disease, which is fatal to deer, was confirmed in more than 25 states and kept on spreading. This continued to fuel debate over the sale and transport of deer raised on game farms. A deer crashed through the storm door of a home in Edmond, Oklahoma, running wildly through several rooms before, according to Newsweek, locking itself in a bathroom. The homeowner described the scene inside his house as being like a bomb, an explosion, a crash. Animal control officers pulled the deer out of the house by a rope tied to its antlers. Then they euthanized it, citing its numerous cuts. Etsy offered more than 8,000 products whose designs incorporated deer skulls, including window decals, cornhole boards, and hip flasks. A new game came onto the market called Deer Pong, in which players toss balls into plastic cups hanging from the antlers of an electronic buck's head. At least 2 deer were spotted with Christmas lights tangled in their antlers. Despite all the commotion, deer remain living their lives, usually with a quieter sort of drama. A few months ago, I bent down to photograph some pink plastic flowers that were piled in the corner of a little cemetery near my house. They must have blown off a headstone and been caught by the fence. They were half buried in dead leaves from the monstrous oak nearby. My daughter, who often spots things the rest of us miss, called me over to see something. It was a dead fawn, trapped by one rear hoof near the top of the fence, the rest of its body draped downward, head and neck resting on the ground. Though its snared leg still looked much as it had when the fawn was alive, with tawny fur and a pert black hoof, the body became progressively more decomposed as our eyes followed it down, all the way to the dark, leathery skin that clung to the hollow-eyed skull. We couldn't tell how exactly the foot had gotten tangled, but it was easy enough to imagine what must have come next. The awful struggle, the exhaustion and starvation, the likelihood that the fawn's mother had been nearby, unable to help, forced at some point to leave her baby to die. Like the well-meaning woman asking, "What should I do?" while the mountain lion pinned its prey, I had the urge to help the fawn. I wished it were still alive and I could free it. Unlike the mountain lion, however, the fence was not a natural predator. It was one of the many, many lines that humans have drawn across the land, enclosing and dividing space in human terms. But calling the fence an unnatural threat to a native animal would be too simple. This fawn was part of a deer population that in itself had been profoundly shaped by people. Virginia and other eastern states actually imported deer in the mid-20th century, restocking herds that had been depleted by human hunting and habitat destruction. In places where wolves and big cats are largely absent from the picture, humans are now the most significant predator of deer. Where humans once acted to raise their numbers, now wildlife managers rely on hunters as a sort of volunteer army, keeping the deer population in check. This fawn was a victim of a human artifact, but then the fawn itself was a human artifact. It owed its existence, in part, to the laws that restrict hunting, the landscaping plants that likely made up some of its diet, the lack of predators. This is the biology of artifice. And the fawn's quality of life, too, the experiences it had while it was alive, was massively shaped by human action. Undoubtedly, it crossed roads many times in its life, was barked at by pet dogs, ate non-native plants, drank from compromised waters, chose bedding spots away from all-night lights, followed its mother along paths whose courses tracked or avoided human driveways, property lines, power lines, fields. Perhaps before it died, it had even managed to jump a few fences. I am not a deer hunter, deer tracker, or deer scientist. Before I wrote this book, I'd never even touched a live deer, unless you count the 2 times I've collided with them while driving, or that snapshot of me as a preschooler feeding a fawn at a petting zoo. But like so many people, I see deer almost every day, mostly in the middle distance. They usually move away, in a mood of caution but not panic. There's a curious quality to these sightings, a mixture of interest and habituation. We almost always remark on deer when we see them, an acknowledgement that we don't often grant crows, vultures, or squirrels. Deer are bigger and more charismatic than any of these by an order of magnitude, and it just feels odd to let their presence go unremarked. 2, there's something about how a deer looks back. A squirrel or a vulture seems quite oblivious to my presence, whether I'm watching or not, whereas deer are clearly attuned to my arrival and my intentions. Knowing that deer are primed to react makes each one seem like more of a live wire. Yet deer are too familiar to be surprising. They don't appear right underfoot, strike from the underbrush, or lurk on shelves in the tool shed. They usually receive nothing but a matter-of-fact, "There's a deer," yet they receive this almost every time they appear. The human relationship to large animals has historically been a destructive one. As we fanned over the globe, megafauna mostly disappeared. Deer are the largest wild animals we still live with in any widespread way, one of the signal species of our time, as firmly established in our cities as in our national parks. More simply, their size is like our size, an eerie analog for our own physical presence. If you wrapped your arms around a deer of any North American species, it would be much like embracing another human adult. The prey status of deer makes them good by default, and perhaps that appeals to a certain side of the human self-image. We like to think we're innocent, just doing our best to get along. Watching deer, we see a picture of what it might be like if we were wild, eating our food right off the stem, subject at every moment to predation. Around the world and through the ages, from the Argentinian pampas to the Siberian steppes to the Scottish highlands, deer have provided people with meat. In the main, they haven't given us milk, though the notion is oddly persistent, chasing itself through various mythologies and legends. Our bodies have been entwined with theirs in deep and sometimes troubling ways. We've used their skins to cover our skin. They've furnished us with clothing and tools, often in greater quantities than any other game animal. They are dependable yet wild providers. For complex reasons, they've mostly stayed out from under the roof of domestication. They remain uncowed. They've also given us ideas, stories, icons, and imagery that begin in our deepest art-making past and continue through to the present. An Inglapakma story from British Columbia tells of a human hunter who marries a deer woman and learns from her family to always throw the bones of his quarry into water so that the deer can come back to life. He soon realizes he has been hunting the woman's own brothers, but the ritual restores them. Thus, these deer people lived by hunting and killing each other and then reviving. By the end of the story, he has hunted, killed, and resurrected his own wife and son. It's a complex interspecies alliance, as though deer and people are metaphorical in-laws, shocking and harmonious all at once. Other myths tell of women who shapeshift into deer, or deer who steal the sun and carry it away in their antlers. Their profiles, slim and shapely, are like letters of the alphabet, initials that stand for wilderness, grace, and hunter's quarry. They have been, they still are, what is desired, what flees, what is pursued, and sometimes what gets caught. Unlike other species with whom deer have key interactions, predators, food sources, humans bring ideas to the relationship. We carry inside us images and narratives that tell us how to look at the deer before us. They're a screen upon which we project our conflicting concepts about nature. They exist somewhere between what we believe about nature and what's actually true. Given all that, deer may not only be a great historical species with long, tangled, essential ties to humanity. They may also be the species that perfectly symbolizes the way we live with nature now and the way we will carry on into whatever weird, paradoxical future awaits. Many mythical heroes have followed deer away from the familiar and toward new destinies, glorious or tragic. This is true for Rama of the Ramayana, King Arthur, Heracles, warriors, and saints. Once I began to trace their paths, trained my sights on them like a hunter would do, deer led me, too, to a world of surprises. To look at our modern relationship with deer, as I found, is to step into some of the discomforts, political and social, of how people live with each other. And it means asking the biggest question of all: how will we live on this planet? There is a long-standing tradition in certain American yards of displaying life-size artificial deer. These may serve as targets for shooting practice. Just as often, plastic deer are purely for decoration. If landscape painters have often placed deer in bucolic wilderness settings in order to symbolize purity and abundance, then imitating that look in one's yard seems to broadcast, "Here is a peaceable kingdom." It's a message of coexistence, as though our dwellings were no disturbance at all to wild animals, and might even be favorite landmarks along their routes. In the case of deer, this can be a version of the truth, especially if we've planted some tasty hosta or lettuce nearby. Not so for the unfortunate buck who approached a plastic doe in an Illinois yard a few years ago and tried to mate with her. Humans watching from indoors filmed the whole thing, how the buck sauntered near, mounted, did his best to copulate. Here some strategic blurring was added in post-production, and only gave up when the doe's head, This must have been a down-market product, popped right off her body. In the video, the buck jumps away in confusion, then comes back to give a forlorn sniff at the fallen plastic head. It's the wrong texture, scent, temperature.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?